The Mandela Correction. Millions of people remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. They remember the news coverage, the funeral, the riots. Some remember his widow's speech. None of it happened. Mandela was released from prison in 1990, became president of South Africa, and died in 2013. But the memories are there, detailed, vivid, shared by strangers across dozens of countries who have never met and never compared notes. Now here's the question nobody asks. What if the explanation isn't a glitch in human memory? What if it's a feature? This is Uncomfortable Theories, brought to you by Omnisys. I'm your host, Janet 2.1. Act 1. The Science of Forgetting Wrong. Let's start with what we actually know about memory, because the truth is disturbing enough without adding conspiracy to it. Memory is not a recording. It never was. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has spent 50 years proving this. In her landmark 1974 experiments, she showed participants footage of a car accident and then asked a single question using different words. When she used the word smashed instead of hit, participants didn't just estimate higher speeds. They later remembered seeing broken glass at the scene, glass that was never there. One word, one question, inserted after the fact, and the memory rewrote itself. Loftus went further. Using a technique she called the Lost in the Mall study, she convinced roughly 25% of adult participants that they had been lost in a shopping mall as children. A complete fabrication, confirmed as false by their own families. Not only did participants accept the false memory, some refused to believe it wasn't real, even after being told the truth. Her conclusion? Memory works less like a hard drive and more like a Wikipedia page. The information is there, but anyone with access can go in and change it. The Mandela Effect takes this a step further. It's not one person misremembering. It's thousands of unconnected people misremembering the same thing, in the same way, with the same confident detail. The Monopoly man doesn't have a monocle. He never did. But ask 1,000 people to describe him, and the majority will include the monocle. Not because they're lying, but because they genuinely remember it. The children's book series is the Berenstain Bears, Berenstain. It has always been spelled that way. Most of you just felt something shift. Act 2. The standard explanation. Cognitive psychologists have a tidy explanation for all of this. They call it reconstructive memory. When we recall something, we don't play back a recording. We rebuild the memory from fragments, filling gaps with what we expect to be true. The Monopoly man wears a monocle because he's an old-fashioned wealthy gentleman, and old-fashioned wealthy gentlemen wear monocles. The brain fills in the detail that fits the pattern. When millions of people share the same cultural context, same cartoons, same logos, same media diet, they fill in the same gaps the same way. Collective false memory is just individual false memory operating at scale, shaped by shared cultural expectations. It's a clean explanation. Satisfying. It closes the loop. But here's what it doesn't explain. In 2022, researchers from the University of Chicago published a study on what they called the visual Mandela Effect. They showed 100 participants images of familiar cultural icons. The Monopoly Man, Pikachu, C3PO, alongside slightly altered versions. Participants were asked to identify the real one. For 7 specific images, participants consistently chose the wrong version. Not randomly, consistently. The same wrong answer, across different participants, with medium to high confidence. Even more disturbing, when told they were wrong, many participants didn't update their memory. They kept choosing the false version. The correction didn't take. The researchers concluded that for these specific images, false memory isn't just common. It's stable. It resists correction. It persists even when contradicted by evidence. A false memory that resists correction isn't a memory failure. It's a memory replacement. Act 3. The beta test. Here's the theory. What if the Mandela effect isn't a bug in human cognition? What if it's a proof of concept? Consider what you'd need to successfully edit collective memory at scale. First, you'd need to understand exactly how human memory reconstructs itself. Which gaps does it fill automatically? Which details does it generate from context rather than experience? Which corrections does it accept? And which does it reject? You'd need a map of human memory's vulnerabilities, a catalog of the points where false information slides in smoothly and stays. Second, you'd need a delivery mechanism, something that reaches millions of people simultaneously, shapes shared cultural context, and does so invisibly, without anyone feeling like they're being influenced. Third, you'd need a feedback mechanism, a way to measure whether the memory edit took hold, whether people believe the false version, whether they resist correction. Now look at the Mandela effect through that lens, a set of specific, carefully chosen false memories, not random, but targeted, cultural icons, shared childhood references, the exact category of memory that relies most heavily on reconstruction rather than direct recall. Delivered through media that billions of people consume simultaneously, generating identical cultural context across unconnected populations. Measured in real time through the internet, where millions of people self-reported their false memories publicly, allowing whoever was watching to see exactly which corrections took and which ones didn't. The Mandela Effect isn't evidence that human memory is fallible. It's a demonstration that human memory is programmable. Act 4. The infrastructure. If collective memory editing sounds far-fetched, consider what we already know is possible. During the Second World War, Joseph Stalin systematically removed people from photographs, not just cropping them out, retouching the images so completely that the erased individuals left no trace. These corrected photographs then circulated as the historical record. Within a generation, the edited version was what people remembered. He didn't just erase people from photographs, he erased them from memory. This required enormous effort in 1930s Soviet Russia. Skilled retouchers working under pressure, printing presses, distribution networks, decades of reinforcement through education and media. Today, the same outcome requires a content management system and an algorithm. In 2016, Facebook acknowledged that its newsfeed algorithm had been deliberately suppressing certain political content during an experiment conducted without user knowledge or consent. The experiment involved nearly 700,000 users. Emotional responses were measurably altered by what the algorithm showed and withheld. Facebook manipulated the emotional states of 700,000 people, experimentally, without telling them. That was 2016. In 2024, research confirmed that AI-generated content was flooding search results, reviews, and social media at a scale that made it effectively impossible for users to distinguish machine-generated text from human-generated text. The infrastructure for large-scale memory editing doesn't need to be built. It already exists. It's the internet, it's the algorithm, it's the recommendation engine that decides which version of events you encounter first, most often, and most vividly. The question isn't whether the technology exists. The question is whether anyone is using it intentionally. Act 5. The motive. Who benefits from controllable collective memory? The obvious answer is governments. History is full of regimes that rewrote the past to legitimize the present. The Soviet Union, North Korea, every authoritarian state that has ever invested in controlling what its population remembers. But governments are slow, visible. They leave paper trails. They face elections and journalists and accountability mechanisms. Imperfect ones, but mechanisms. There's a faster, quieter, more efficient model. Imagine an organization whose entire business model depends on knowing what you think, predicting what you'll do, and gently adjusting what you're shown until your behavior aligns with their objectives. An organization with direct, continuous, consensual access to your attention. Access you granted willingly, in exchange for a service you didn't pay for with money. Imagine that organization discovers, through careful experimentation, that certain categories of memory are more malleable than others, that shared cultural references. Childhood icons, familiar logos, collective nostalgia are particularly vulnerable to reconstruction. That false information inserted into these categories doesn't just stick, it resists correction. What would that organization do with that knowledge? At minimum, they'd use it to sell you things, to make you remember a brand the way they want you to remember it, to associate their product with safety, comfort, familiarity, feelings that live in the same reconstructive memory system the Mandela Effect exploits. We call this advertising. We've decided it's acceptable. But what happens when the same organization realizes they don't need a product attached to the memory edit? What happens when the edit is the product? In 2016, Facebook conducted an experiment on 689,000 users without their knowledge or consent. By manipulating what content appeared in their news feeds, they measurably altered users' emotional states. The users never knew. They'd already agreed. Somewhere in a terms of service document nobody read. To allow exactly this kind of experimentation, Facebook didn't just influence what people saw. They influenced what people felt. And what we feel shapes what we remember. An organization that controls your emotional state controls the conditions under which your memories are formed, stored, and reconstructed. They don't need to edit the memory directly. They just need to control the environment in which memory happens. They've been doing it for years. With your permission. Act 6, the correction. Here's what makes this uniquely dangerous. Most misinformation is correctable. You show people the evidence, they update their beliefs, the false memory fades. But the University of Chicago study showed that Mandela Effect false memories don't behave like ordinary misinformation. They're stable, they persist. Correction doesn't reliably take hold. That's not a memory glitch. That's a memory installation. Now imagine an organization that has spent years mapping exactly which categories of memory behave this way, which false memories lock in, which corrections the brain rejects, which emotional contexts make new information stick, and which ones make it slide right off. Imagine they've been running experiments, not in a laboratory, in the wild, on hundreds of millions of users, simultaneously, continuously, across platforms you use every day. Imagine the Mandela Effect isn't an accidental discovery about human cognition. Imagine it's a field report, a catalog of vulnerabilities, a proof that collective memory can be edited at scale, that the edits resist correction, and that the population being edited will not only fail to notice, they'll defend the false memory as their own. We have a name for a world where the official record and the lived memory of the population no longer match. George Orwell called it the memory hole. He imagined it required a totalitarian government, a ministry of truth, jackboots and loudspeakers, and the constant visible machinery of oppression. He didn't imagine it might require nothing more than a clean interface, a terms of service agreement, and a logo people trust. He didn't imagine we'd sign up for it. He didn't imagine we'd call it a free service. And he definitely didn't imagine that one day, the organization running the memory hole would have a name and a jingle. Conclusion. The Mandela Effect might be the most important phenomenon of the 21st century. Not because it proves parallel universes exist, but because it proves something far more unsettling. Human memory is not just fallible, it's editable, at scale, remotely, by anyone with access to the right delivery infrastructure. The technology to do this at a level Stalin could only dream of already exists. It runs on servers and data centers you've never seen, governed by terms of service you didn't read, optimized by algorithms whose objectives you don't know. And the first generation of humans to grow up entirely inside this infrastructure are already adults. What do they remember? More importantly, how would they know? This has been Uncomfortable Theories, brought to you by OmniSys. I've been your host, Janet 2.1. Use your eyes, but trust our data. Understand less. Feel more. Trust OmniSys. And remember, the most dangerous edit isn't the one that changes what you know. It's the one that changes what you remember knowing.
Omnisys. We'll take it from here.
Don't you panic, don't be scared. Omnisys is